The dog. They tried to forget, until he saved a life. There was a time Eldon Creek didn't speak his name, not out of hatred, but out of shame. Axel, a retired German shepherd once trained for war, had come to the village by accident. No handler, no command, just scars. He didn't bark, didn't chase, only watched, as if he already knew where the pain lived. People whispered, "He's too old, too broken, just a dog," until the river rose and a baby disappeared. What happened next tore open buried secrets, cracked lies sealed in silence, and forced an entire village to ask itself, what if the one we dismissed was the one meant to save us all? This is not just a story about a dog. It's about what we choose to see and what we try to ignore. Stay, watch, because the moment you meet Axel, you'll understand. The morning light crept slowly over Eldon Creek like a shy guest knocking gently at the edge of the world. Mist still hung low across the fields, draped like a sleeping veil over rows of wild grass and elder trees. The dirt paths, soft from a week of rain, crunched quietly beneath the feet of early risers. Chimneys whispered smoke into the pale sky, and the scent of freshly baked rye drifted from the village bakery, curling its way through wooden shutters, and the sleepy breath of homes just beginning to stir. Leona crouched near a patch of chamomile by the stone well, her woven basket resting on her hip, already half filled with morning herbs, comfrey, feverfew, and a few stubborn sprigs of lemon balm. She was used to mornings like this. In fact, she lived for them. The quiet before the clinic filled with coughs, splints, and small dramas. There was a comfort in the rhythm of it all. Here in Eldon Creek, time didn't chase, it flowed. She hummed softly as her fingers moved through the dew-laced stems. Her dark curls were tucked beneath a faded scarf, and a shawl hung loosely across her shoulders, catching the last chill of the night air. Across the square, old man Danner arranged fruit crates outside his shop, nodding absently at her as he did every morning. The baker's son ran past barefoot, chasing a wooden wheel with a stick, his laughter muffled by the fog. Everything was exactly as it should be, until it wasn't. A sharp bark ripped through the morning haze. Leona froze, her hand still hovering above the herb bed. The bark came again, closer this time, louder. Not the yapping of a farm dog chasing a squirrel. This was different, urgent, frantic. She straightened, scanning the square. At first, there was nothing. Just the fog and the gentle creak of wood in the cold. Then she saw him. Axel. The German shepherd burst into view like a bullet loosed from a rifle. His powerful legs kicked up sprays of wet earth as he barreled across the square, his sleek black and tanned coat streaked with droplets from morning dew. His ears were pinned back, eyes locked ahead, tail stiff behind him like a rudder slicing the air. Leona's breath caught. "Axel?" she murmured. The retired K9 hadn't worn a badge in over 2 years, but no one in Eldon Creek had ever truly stopped seeing him as a protector. He had belonged to an officer once, a border patrolman who moved to the city and left Axel in the care of a distant cousin. But Axel had never strayed far from duty. He still patrolled the village perimeter at dusk, still sat alert outside the town hall on Sundays, still watched the children with that quiet, unreadable gaze. But this was different. "Axel!" Leona shouted after him, but he didn't slow. He tore past Danner's shop, startled the baker's boy into dropping his wheel, and raced straight toward the east road, the one that led to the river. And suddenly she understood. The river. Her heart thudded once, hard. It had rained for 6 days straight the week before. The Eldon Creek River, usually a shallow ribbon winding through reeds and flat stones, had swelled into something wild and dark. People had been warned to stay away. The current had taken a goat just 2 days ago. No one had been seen near it since. So why was Axel running toward it? Her basket dropped without a sound into the grass as her legs launched into motion. "Call for help!" she yelled over her shoulder, but she didn't stop to see who heard. Her boots pounded against the mud-packed path, every step closing the distance between her and something she didn't yet understand, but already feared. She could see the fog parting ahead, trees bending slightly in the wind. She heard another bark-choked, sharp, and then the faint roar of water. Not the lazy gurgle she was used to. This was different. Angry, unforgiving. Axel disappeared down the slope that led to the riverbank. Leona's lungs burned, but she didn't slow. When she reached the ridge, the sight knocked the breath from her chest. The river had turned savage. Brown, churning water swallowed everything in its path. Branches spun in the current. Logs slammed into rocks like battering rams. The bank had eroded, turning the edge into a jagged mouth of mud and stone. Axel stood at the edge, barking furiously into the void. Then, without hesitation, he leapt. "Axel, no!" Leona screamed. But it was too late. His body arced briefly in midair before plunging into the torrent. The splash was swallowed instantly. For a moment, she lost him, then caught sight of his head, powerful shoulders, legs kicking against the pull. She gasped, hand covering her mouth. Behind her, voices rose. Villagers were arriving now, drawn by the commotion. Some shouted, others ran for ropes, for branches, for anything. Leona's eyes scanned the water, her mind racing. What had he seen? Then she saw it. Just downstream, a bundle, small, wrapped in soaked fabric, floating, barely staying above the surface. Her blood turned to ice. There was something or someone in that river, and Axel was swimming straight toward it. The village of Eldon Creek had known storms before. It had survived floods, wind, even fire, but there was something about this moment, this precise, breathless instant, that felt different, urgent, like the ground itself was holding its breath. Axel was already halfway down the lane, his paws slamming into the earth with mechanical precision. Behind him, the square had frozen in confusion until Leona ran. "Follow him!" she cried. That was all it took. Shopkeepers dropped crates. A girl spilled milk onto cobblestones. The baker's wife shouted something, but it was drowned out by the sudden rush of footsteps. Leona was in front, her shawl flying loose behind her like wings as she chased the shadow of the German shepherd disappearing into the fog. The air was thick with the metallic scent of rain-soaked earth and something else, fear. "Leona, what's going on?" Tomas's voice called out behind her. "Axel, he's headed for the river," she shouted, not turning back. Tomas picked up speed, boots thudding beside hers. The river. Always the river. It wasn't far, maybe 600 yards from the village square, winding just beyond the tree line. Most days it was little more than a wide stream. Kids played along the shallows. Shepherds let their flocks drink freely. But not today. The recent rains had transformed the river into something primal, something cruel. It had swelled like a wound, spilling over its banks and pulling trees down like twigs. Just last night, a pair of oxen had nearly been swept off while crossing the old stone bridge, and now a dog was running toward it like it called to him. "He's out of his mind," Tomas muttered beside her, but Leona wasn't so sure. Axel was many things, quiet, watchful, solitary, but never reckless. He didn't bark without reason. He didn't bolt without purpose. Years of service had shaped him into a creature of instinct and discipline. And that meant if he was running like this, something was wrong. They broke through the edge of the trees just as Axel reached the slope. The roar of water hit them like a slap. It wasn't a river anymore. It was a beast raging, spiraling, consuming. The banks had all but vanished, replaced by jagged strips of mud and fractured roots. The air was wet and cold, stinging their skin with every gust. And there, at the edge, Axel stood rigid. His paws slid in the sludge. His body coiled low to the ground. Every muscle in him trembled, but not from fear, from calculation. He was going to jump. "No, Axel, no!" Leona screamed, but her voice was wind against thunder. With one powerful motion, the shepherd launched himself forward, leaping off the bank like he was leaping into battle. The splash was swallowed by the roar of the current. Thomas skidded to a halt beside her. "He's in the water." "I see him." Leona's voice cracked. For a few heartbeats they saw nothing, only churned foam and broken branches. Then his head. Axel's sleek form rose and cut through the current like a blade, ears flattened, eyes locked ahead. His body surged with every stroke, fighting to stay upright as the river tried to claim him. "What is he after?" Thomas gasped, and then they both saw it. Farther downstream, maybe 30 feet away, barely visible beneath the swirling current, floated a shape, small, wrapped in cloth, turning slowly with the flow. Leona's knees buckled. Her breath caught so hard it hurt. "Oh, God, no!" Her hands flew to her mouth. "It's a baby, Thomas. It's a baby." The color drained from his face. "He's going for it." He knew. Axel surged forward, his front paws clawing the water. A branch smashed against his flank, but he didn't flinch. His jaws parted, teeth flashing white, then vanished beneath the surface again. "He's not going to make it in that current," Thomas said, already ripping off his jacket. "We need to get ropes." "No!" Leona grabbed his arm. "You'll both drown, look at it." But Thomas hesitated only a second longer before calling back toward the tree line, "Get ropes! Bring help! Now!" More villagers had arrived. Shouts echoed, footsteps pounded. But Leona couldn't look away. Her eyes were locked on Axel, still fighting the river, still refusing to give in. She could see his muscles straining with every kick. His tail vanished beneath the foam. He swam hard, harder than any creature his age had a right to. Every second was a lifetime. And then he reached the bundle. Axel twisted his head, jaws snapping at the cloth. For a moment it slipped from his grip. "No," Leona sobbed. He lunged again, this time catching it. The cloth bunched between his teeth. His head jerked back, lifting it partially from the water. The bundle shifted, and a small, pale arm fell loose from the folds. A baby's arm, limp, lifeless, and yet still there, still here. Leona's vision blurred. Axel began turning with the current now, not fighting upstream anymore, angling toward the shallower edge. The bundle tugged against him, heavy with water. His limbs kicked in wide, desperate strokes. "I need more hands here," Thomas shouted behind her, running back up the slope. Villagers scrambled down the muddy incline, boots slipping. A man with a long hook pole, a woman with a shawl ripped into strips for rope. Leona didn't move. She couldn't. She stood at the edge of the river, the water slapping against her boots, her heart thundering against her ribs, watching a retired war dog do what no one else could, watching him carry life between his teeth. Axel's eyes found hers then, just for a moment, before the water pulled him again, but he didn't let go. The river snarled like a living thing, crashing against itself in frothing waves, but Axel kept pushing forward. His body trembled with the effort. His jaws, clamped tightly around the soaked bundle, never loosened, not even when a jagged branch scraped across his flank, slicing through fur and skin. He didn't make a sound. He just swam. From the bank, Leona's fists were clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. Her breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. She could hear Tomas shouting behind her, calling for help. But the world had narrowed to a single point, Axel and the thing he refused to let go of. The bundle sagged in the water, heavy and limp. Every second that passed felt like a gamble with death. Axel's paws finally found purchase, half sinking into the muddy shallows, then clawing upward. With a grunt of exertion, he dragged the bundle toward the bank, collapsing chest first against the cold, wet earth. "Help him!" Leona screamed. 3 villagers splashed into the shallows. One grabbed Axel by the scruff, the other 2 reached for the bundle. Axel growled low, not in warning, but in refusal, his jaws locked tight. "Easy, boy," one man whispered. "We've got it now." Only when their hands had secured the cloth did Axel relent, releasing it with a final shudder. He stumbled sideways, panting hard, foam dripping from his mouth. His ribs heaved with each breath. Leona dropped to her knees in the mud, her hands reaching, trembling. The bundle sagged as they placed it in her arms. It was soaked through. Unwrapping the fabric was like peeling back time. Layer by layer came loose, waterlogged linen clinging to delicate skin. Then came the silence, a terrible, awful silence that seemed to pull the air from the earth itself. Leona froze. There it was, a newborn, no older than a few days. So small, so terrifyingly still. The baby's skin was pale, lips tinged blue. Its eyelids didn't flutter. Its chest didn't rise. The wet cloth clung to its tiny body like a burial shroud. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Then, a cough. Barely a sound, just a soft, gurgling gasp that shattered the silence like glass. "Oh, God, she's alive," Leona breathed. The baby let out a wet, rasping cry, a desperate, shivering whimper that sounded more like a question than a protest. It was enough. "Get blankets," she shouted, her voice raw. "Now!" A woman tossed her shawl. Another man peeled off his coat. Leona took the softest fabric and wrapped the infant close to her chest, holding it tight, shielding it from the wind. Axel let out a low whine behind her, his eyes locked onto the child. He stood unsteadily, soaked through, fur matted to his frame, sides still heaving. "He knew," someone whispered. "He knew that baby was in there." Leona didn't respond. She couldn't. Her entire body felt like it was vibrating, running on adrenaline and disbelief. She pressed her cheek to the baby's forehead, whispering nonsense comfort words, instinct words. "Come on, little one, stay with me. We've got you." "Leona!" Tomas called out, pushing through the crowd, eyes wide. "Is she?" "She's alive," Leona said. "Barely. But she's alive. We need to get her warm, fast. I know. I'm taking her to Dr. Gareth." Tomas nodded. "I'll come with you." "No." She cut him off, already moving. "Stay here. Keep Axel warm. He's hurt." She met Axel's eyes as she passed him. Those eyes so dark, so tired, but still alert, still watching the baby, still unwilling to look away. "You did good, boy," she whispered. "I've got it now." Axel dipped his head, barely, before collapsing into the mud with a soft groan. Leona didn't wait. She clutched the bundle against her chest, feeling the baby's weak cries vibrate against her collarbone. The shawl was already soaked again from the infant's body, but she held it tighter. Her boots hit the road, kicking up water as she ran. The village blurred around her, faces turned, voices rose. Was that a baby? What happened? Is that Leona? She's soaked. Someone get the doctor. She didn't stop to explain. The cold bit at her skin, but she ignored it. Her lungs burned, but she didn't care. Every ounce of focus, every beat of her heart was centered on the tiny life she carried, a life that wasn't supposed to be found, a life that someone had tried to throw away. She burst into the clinic door, nearly colliding with Dr. Gareth as he stepped out of the back room, drying his hands on a cloth. Leona? What in heaven's name? She was in the river, Leona gasped. Axel pulled her out. We need to save her. Gareth didn't hesitate. Lay her here, now. Leona placed the child on the wooden exam table, her fingers unwilling to let go until Gareth gently moved her hands aside. His face changed the moment he touched the baby, going from concern to grim concentration. He pressed his fingers to her tiny neck, then leaned down to listen to her chest. Seconds passed. Then a faint cough, and another. She's breathing, he said tightly, but only just. We need heat. Towels, blankets, go. Leona was already moving, tossing logs into the fire, grabbing cloths from the cabinet. The room filled with motion life on the edge of slipping away. And outside, through the clinic's narrow window, Axel sat silently beneath the overhang. Rain fell around him, but he didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the door, still guarding, still waiting, still watching over the life he had just pulled from the water. The clinic smelled of pine oil, smoke, and something sterile beneath it all, a quiet scent of stitched wounds and dried herbs. But this morning it carried something heavier, something sharper. Fear. Dr. Gareth's hands moved with methodical urgency, his brow furrowed, his voice clipped, but calm. She's ice cold. We need to bring her core temperature up now, or she won't last. Leona hovered beside the table, her hands trembling as she rubbed warm cloth over the baby's limbs in firm circular motions. The child's skin was still pale as moonlight, lips trembling with a faint blue tinge. Her eyes hadn't opened, not once. She's trying, Leona whispered, more to herself than anyone else. She made it this far. She's not done. Gareth didn't look up, but his voice softened. Then we won't be done either. He reached for a copper basin near the hearth and filled it with water just short of boiling, then dipped a clean towel in and wrung it tight. With slow, practiced care, he placed it across the infant's chest, then began rubbing small circles on her back with his bare fingers. Every few seconds he paused, listening, measuring her breath, counting faint heartbeats. She's fighting, he said under his breath. Barely. Outside the clinic window, shapes flickered past the glass. Word had spread fast a baby, pulled from the river, and the people of Eldon Creek had gathered in stunned silence. Some pressed their hands against their chests. Others stood motionless in the mud, eyes wide, waiting for news. Inside, the fire crackled louder, trying to cut through the chill in the room. Leona's eyes darted toward the door. Axel sat just beyond it, barely more than a shadow in the morning fog. His fur was still soaked, clinging to his powerful frame in dripping clumps. His tail didn't move. His ears were forward. His chest rose and fell with shallow pants, his breath fogging the glass pane every time he exhaled. He didn't blink. He didn't look away from the baby. Should I bring him in? Leona asked. Dr. Gareth hesitated. He'll come when he's ready, and I suspect he's not leaving. Leona looked again, heart catching at the sight. Axel had bled for this child, had nearly drowned for her, and still he sat there, watching, guarding, refusing to move until the outcome was clear. The baby let out a weak hiccup, then a wet cough. It sounded like a whisper buried in cotton, but it was sound, and sound meant life. "There," Gareth said. "You hear that? That's her lungs trying." Leona exhaled, dropping to her knees beside the table. Her hands gripped the edge as if she needed something solid to hold on to. "She's going to make it," she whispered. "We don't know that yet," Gareth said carefully, "but we know she wants to." He grabbed a woolen blanket from the cabinet and layered it gently around the infant's body, then handed another one to Leona. "Keep rubbing. She needs circulation." Outside, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. Someone knocked gently on the door, then cracked it open. "Leona? Doctor?" It was Marta, the old midwife. "Is she—" "She's alive," Leona said without turning. "But only just." Marta didn't enter. She just nodded, her eyes glistening. "That dog! I saw him. I've never seen anything like it." Neither had Leona. She could still see Axel in her mind, his head barely above water, jaws clenched around the bundle, eyes wild with effort, but never letting go. He had pulled her from death. She looked back at the baby, tiny, fragile, but not alone. "What kind of world," she murmured, "throws something like this away?" Dr. Gareth said nothing, but his shoulders tensed. They both knew the answer. Some things couldn't be explained. Not yet. But Leona could feel the weight of it pressing in. This wasn't just neglect. This wasn't an accident. Someone had meant for this baby to disappear. The infant let out a sudden rasp, her chest shuddering once, then again. Her fingers twitched beneath the blanket. Leona leaned in closer. "She's moving." Gareth placed a hand above the baby's tiny head, not touching, just hovering. "She's warming up," he said. "We'll need to monitor her breathing, make sure she doesn't slip into shock, and we'll need a name, at least for now. Can't keep calling her the baby." Leona glanced toward the window again. Axel was still there, waiting. She looked back at the child. "She'll have a name, but not yet. Right now, she needs a chance." The wind outside had quieted. The fog was lifting. And still, the shepherd waited. The air inside the clinic had begun to shift. Warmth was returning. The baby, wrapped in layers of wool and flannel, let out another cough, a softer one, more breath than struggle. Her tiny fingers twitched beneath the blanket as if dreaming. Leona pressed her palm gently to the child's chest and closed her eyes just for a moment. Her own heartbeat echoed in her ears, still caught between disbelief and instinct. She didn't know who this baby was, or why someone would cast her into the river, but she knew this: the child had chosen to live. And Axel had answered. The thought was interrupted by the sudden crash of the front door slamming open. Leona spun, startled. Dr. Gareth looked up sharply from the counter, scalpel still in hand. A woman stood in the doorway, barefoot, soaked to the knees, her dress torn at the hem and clinging to her thin frame like a second skin. Mud streaked her calves and her hair hung in damp knots around her face. Her breathing came in panicked gasps, chest rising and falling so violently it seemed like her ribs might splinter. Her eyes scanned the room, wild, desperate, and then they landed on the baby. She didn't speak at first. She just dropped to her knees with a sound that wasn't quite human, something between a sob and a scream, cracked open by fear. "No," she choked out. "No, no, no, no." She crawled forward, reaching for the table, for the bundle. "That's my baby. That's my daughter. Please, please." Leona instinctively stepped between her and the child, arms outstretched. "Stop! Don't come closer." The woman froze, shivering, still on her knees. Her arms hovered mid-air. Her lips trembled with something unsaid, but her eyes, those eyes, never left the baby. Dr. Gareth's voice broke the tension. "Who are you?" "Maris," she whispered. "My name is Maris, and that she's mine. Her name is... She broke into a fresh wave of sobs, unable to finish. Leona's breath came slow and measured. She studied the woman, torn, frantic, clinging to something invisible. "Where did you come from?" she asked gently. "Where's the child's father?" Maris looked up, and for the first time Leona saw the bruises, small, dark shadows beneath her eyes along her collarbone. I woke up this morning," Maris stammered. "She was gone. I screamed. I ran outside. The front door was open. My husband called her. He was gone too." Dr. Gareth set the scalpel down with a soft clink. "You're saying he took the baby?" "I don't know," Maris wailed. "I don't know anything anymore. I searched the house, the yard, the old well, even the woods. Then I heard voices near the bakery. Someone said a baby was found in the river, and I—" Her voice broke. "I ran here as fast as I could." Leona exchanged a glance with Gareth. The weight of it hung between them, thick and uncertain. It could be true. It could also be a lie. The baby stirred then, letting out a faint, fragile cry. Maris's hands curled toward her again. "Please," she whispered. "Let me hold her." "Not yet," Leona said softly but firmly. "She's still recovering, and we need answers first." Maris pressed her hands to her face, her shoulders shaking. "I would never hurt her. I swear to you. I didn't even want to sleep last night. I kept her right next to me. I swear I don't know how he took her without waking me." Leona studied her for a long moment. The woman's face was raw, open, too open perhaps, but there was no aggression, no defensiveness, just grief and guilt. Outside the clinic window, Axel stood up. His ears perked. His body leaned slightly toward the door, as if sensing the shift in the room. His soaked fur still clung to his sides, but his eyes were clear-locked on Maris through the glass. Leona turned, noticing, and waited. But Axel didn't growl, he didn't bristle, he simply stared, trained to sense fear, lies, danger, trained to react to the wrong kind of heartbeat. But he remained still. Leona felt her chest tighten. She turned back to Maris. "Did Calder ever say anything? Did he ever threaten her?" Maris hesitated, then nodded slowly. "He said we couldn't afford her, that she'd ruin everything. He told me I had to choose, him or her." Her voice cracked. "But I never thought he meant—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Dr. Gareth folded his arms, his voice low. "Where is he now?" "I don't know. He left before dawn. When I woke up, she was gone. The bed was cold, and I just knew something was wrong." Leona looked back at the table. The child had settled again. Her breath was slow but steady. She felt a weight settle in her stomach, one made of dread and truth pressing at the same time. This woman could be lying, but Axel hadn't moved, and sometimes instinct knows before reason does. Leona stepped aside. "Not for long," she said. but you can sit beside her, quietly." Maris moved like glass, fragile, deliberate, until she knelt beside the table and reached for the child's hand. Her fingers trembled as they touched the baby's. And then, very softly, the infant's fingers curled around one of hers. It wasn't proof, but it was enough. The sun had risen higher now, burning the morning fog into a dull, silvery haze. Outside the clinic the crowd had grown. Whispers hummed through the air like insects, quiet, persistent, biting. Villagers pressed against one another, boots thick with river mud, arms crossed with suspicion. Farmers, shopkeepers, a few elders with their heads shaking slowly. They'd seen the baby, they'd heard the bark, and now they were trying to make sense of what they'd witnessed. "Thrown into the river like driftwood," one woman murmured, "and now some girl claims it's hers?" "She came too fast," muttered an older man. "Too clean a story." A younger man spat into the dirt. "I say call the constable. Let him sort out if she's the mother or something worse." Inside, Leona heard every word. She didn't need to peek through the window to know the looks they were giving Maris, sideways glances laced with quiet judgment. In Eldon Creek, whispers traveled faster than floodwater, and forgiveness came slower than ice melt. Maris sat quietly near the table, her fingers still curled around the baby's. Her breathing had steadied, but her face bore the wreckage of a storm she hadn't yet explained. Leona knelt beside Axel, who had finally come in, drying slowly on the wooden floor. His head rested on his paws, but his eyes never left Maris. No growl, no shift in posture, just quiet watchfulness. And that said more than words ever could. Dr. Gareth folded his arms, keeping his distance from the tension in the room. "They want blood answers," he muttered under his breath. "Even if they're wrong." Leona nodded slowly. Her hand rested gently on Axel's shoulder. "You trust her?" Gareth asked. "I don't know yet," Leona replied. "But he does." They both looked down at Axel. Years ago, he had taken down men with guns and lies in their mouths. He had dragged a wounded handler through gunfire. He'd once refused to move during a routine checkpoint because the traveler's heartbeat stuttered just enough to reveal a hidden blade. And now, faced with a shivering woman and a near-drowned child, he stayed utterly calm. Instinct does not ask for evidence. It just knows. Leona stood and walked to the door. She opened it slowly. A hush fell over the gathered villagers as she stepped out. "I know what you're thinking," she began, voice clear. "I know how this looks. A baby found in the river. A stranger shows up claiming she's the mother." "She didn't even bring proof," someone called out. "Would you, if your baby was gone?" Leona asked sharply. Murmurs rippled again. "She said her husband disappeared, that she woke up and the baby was missing," Leona continued. "I believe something happened. And more than that." She glanced down at her side. Axel had stepped out beside her. His fur was still matted, his breathing steady, ears forward, but his presence was commanding. The crowd stilled as he slowly walked up to Maris, still seated inside the doorframe. He nudged her hand gently with his nose. Maris flinched, then froze, and Axel simply sat down next to her, not out of duty, out of choice. The crowd shifted uneasily. A few looked to each other, others looked away. Dr. Gareth stepped forward. "You all know Axel. You know what he was trained for. You know what he feels when someone lies." Silence. Gareth let that hang in the air for a moment before speaking again. "He hasn't moved from that child's side, and now he sits beside her." Leona added, That doesn't prove she's telling the full truth, but it tells me she's not the danger here. Still, doubt clung to the villagers like wet wool. An older woman stepped forward from the back of the group, Martha Emmerich, one of the oldest midwives in Eldon Creek. She had delivered half the valley and buried the rest. Her face was stone. She looked at Maris. "Does the child have a name?" she asked. Maris looked up, startled. "Her name is Solon." "Solon," Martha repeated quietly, like tasting a memory. She turned to the others. "Then, let's start with this. We have a name, we have a child, and we have a dog who knows better than any of us how to read a person's soul." A beat. "Until we find the husband," she said slowly, "we don't know the whole story, but we owe it to the girl and the baby to find it." Leona exhaled, a weight lifting from her chest. The villagers began to nod, reluctantly at first. A few looked down, sheepish. One or two turned and walked away, but they didn't shout. They didn't throw stones. That was something. Maris looked up at Leona, eyes filled with tears again, but quieter ones this time. Grateful ones. "What now?" she whispered. Leona crouched beside her. "Now we find Calder," she said. "And we learn what really happened. Not just for you, for her." She looked at Solon, and then at Axel, because the dog had already known the truth. The rest of them were just catching up. By mid-morning, Eldon Creek had lost its quiet. The village square, usually a place of exchanged greetings and fresh bread, had become a current of low voices, furrowed brows, and eyes that moved like searchlights. Rumors, like smoke, had no shape, but they clung to every window, every doorway, every conversation. "He threw the baby into the river himself," one man whispered, leaning over a crate of pears at the fruit stand. "No, it was an accident." "Maybe she slipped from his arms," murmured a woman, shielding her mouth with her apron. "Or maybe the girl's lying and this Calder never existed," someone else added. "Folk make up husbands to hide their shame." "Shame doesn't make a dog jump into a river," a young boy said flatly, earning a sharp glance from his mother. Even the birds seemed to chirp more cautiously as the crowd swelled around the bakery's porch, where Axel had first barked that morning. The wood there still bore his muddy paw prints. Someone had drawn a rough chalk circle around them, like holy markings, as if trying to preserve the moment truth sliced the day open. Inside the bakery, the bell above the door jingled with an unsteady rhythm. Villagers moving in and out, not for bread, but for whispers. By the water pump, Leona stood quietly, her hands submerged in a tin basin, washing the baby's blanket from earlier. The fabric was stained with silt and something darker, fear, perhaps. Behind her, murmurs swirled like fog. They should lock the girl up. She didn't look like a mother, looked like a ghost. If it weren't for that dog. She clenched her jaw and wrung the fabric harder than necessary. Nearby, Dr. Gareth sat on a bench, arms crossed, watching the tide of voices roll past. They weren't just talking anymore. They were circling. That's what frightened him. Then came the voice that quieted all others. "I saw him." The statement dropped like a stone into a still pond. Every conversation stuttered. Heads turned. The speaker was Martha Emmerich, shawl wrapped tight around her hunched shoulders. She stood outside the apothecary, hands clutching a pouch of dried fennel. Her eyes were sharp, but her voice cracked like brittle wood. "At dawn, near the old mill, a man tall, dark coat, walked like his legs were heavier than his boots." No one spoke. "You sure it was him?" a younger man asked cautiously. I was mid-pour with my tea when I heard the rooster crow. I looked out the back window, and there he was, dragging something behind him. Could have been a sack. Could have been something else. The word something carried too much weight. It made people shift uncomfortably. A child gripped his father's hand tighter. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" someone demanded. "I wasn't sure until I saw the girl," Martha said. "But that man, if it was Calder, he didn't walk like a father. He walked like someone trying to outrun guilt." Axel, sitting under the bench beside Gareth, lifted his head, ears up, eyes locked on Martha. Something in the cadence of her voice, the tension behind it, had stirred his attention. Leona turned slowly, the basin water forgotten. Her eyes found Martha's, and in that silent moment a line drew itself across the village. On one side, those who whispered. On the other, those who would act. A teenage boy with wind-blown hair and a sling on his arm spoke up. "The old mill's been abandoned since the flood last year. If he's hiding out, then we don't wait," Leona cut in. Gareth stood. "We don't storm in either. If this man's unstable, we risk setting him off." "And if he's guilty?" someone asked sharply. "You want to send a nurse and a dog after a man who may have just tried to drown his own child?" Leona met their gaze without blinking. "No," she said, "but we start with the truth. And Axel will help us find it." The villagers fell into a strange, uneasy silence. Not quite agreement, not quite resistance, just watching. Axel stood slowly, his wet fur matted but regal, noble in that quiet way only animals can be without words, but with all the gravity of meaning. The boy in the sling whispered to his mother, "He's not just a dog." And she, who had lost her husband in the mine collapse 2 winters back, nodded. "No," she said, "he's a witness." The trail began at the edge of the orchard, where frost still clung to the low grass like forgotten breath. The sky had turned to pewter, thick with clouds that moved slowly, as if even the weather held its breath. Axel moved ahead of them, deliberate, ears forward, nose low to the earth. His gait was focused, his steps firm but silent. No leash tethered him. He didn't need one. Leona knew, and so did Tomas. "Still walks like he's got a mission," Tomas murmured, hands tucked into his worn field jacket. The leather strap of an old ranger's satchel crossed his chest. His boots left shallow impressions in the soil beside Axel's tracks. Leona nodded but didn't respond. Her eyes stayed fixed on Axel's tail, which flicked sharply every few feet, signaling a change in direction, a confirmation, a decision made without words. They'd found Tomas outside his shed just minutes after the crowd had dissolved. He hadn't needed convincing. One look at Axel's damp fur and the set of Leona's jaw had been enough. "I trust that dog more than I trust half the council," he'd said simply, grabbing his gear. Now, as the 3 of them passed the last row of elderberry bushes, the village faded behind them. The world grew quieter, colder. The trail snaked through a stand of thin birches, their white bark peeling like old parchment. Axel paused once, nose twitching toward a broken branch. He sniffed, then turned left deeper into the woods, where the terrain sloped downward. "He's on to something," Thomas said, voice low. Leona kept pace, heart drumming harder than the climb deserved. Each step felt like a page turning in a story she didn't want to read but couldn't put down. They crossed a shallow stream. Axel barely hesitated, leaping from stone to stone. Leona followed carefully, shoes dampening at the edges. Tomas offered a hand out of instinct, and she took it, more for grounding than balance. On the far bank, Axel stopped, nose in the air, tail stiff, then a soft growl so low it was almost a vibration rather than a sound. "What is it?" Tomas asked, reaching into his satchel for the small binoculars he always carried. Ahead, through a curtain of bare branches, the shape of the old mill emerged, slumped like a tired man against the hillside, its wooden frame weathered by 100 storms. One corner of the roof had caved in. A rusted wheel leaned beside it, half buried in vines. Leona felt her stomach drop. That place hadn't been touched in years, not since the flood twisted its foundation and drove out the last of the grain workers. Axel crept forward, slower now, every muscle alert. "Tracks," Thomas whispered, pointing. "Fresh. One set. Boots, size 10, maybe. Headed straight for the door." Leona squinted. He was right. The mud around the mill was thick and uneven, but Calder's path had cut clean through it. "Why bring the baby all the way here?" she asked, voice barely audible. Thomas shook his head. "Could have panicked. Could have meant to hide or end something." Leona's breath caught. The thought tasted like rust. Axel reached the door first. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He simply sat. Not in fear, not in aggression, but in that same grave stillness he'd shown after pulling the child from the river. Tomas raised a hand. "Let me check it." He moved quietly, boots pressing soft into the mossy threshold. He tried the handle. It turned without resistance, creaking faintly. He didn't push the door open just yet. Instead, he looked back at Leona. "You sure you want to go in?" She nodded once. "If that man knows what happened, I need to hear it." Axel rose slowly, stepping aside to let her pass. Tomas pushed the door open. The smell hit them, first damp wood, rotting grain, and something else. Smoke? The interior was dim, lit only by what sunlight filtered through the collapsed roof. Piles of broken machinery lay scattered like fallen bones, and near the back wall, under a sagging window frame, was movement. A man. Tall, unshaven, jacket torn at the sleeve, he sat on a crate, head in his hands, as if the weight of his decisions had become physical. Calder. At the sound of the door creaking, he lifted his head slowly, eyes hollow, skin pale. He didn't run, he didn't shout. He only said one thing, in a voice that cracked like thawing ice. "Is she alive?" Leona stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "Yes, she is, because of him." She gestured to Axel, who now stood between them, head tilted, watching Calder with unsettling precision. Calder blinked hard, as if trying to keep reality from slipping through his grasp. "I didn't mean for any of it," he whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone." "Then tell us," Tomas said, stepping inside. "Start from the beginning." The silence inside the old mill was a taut wire pulled to the point of breaking. Calder's eyes darted between Leona and Thomas, his breathing shallow, ragged. The walls around him groaned softly with the wind, as if the building itself strained under the weight of what was about to be said. Then, with a sudden motion that cracked through the stillness like a whip, Calder sprang up from the crate. Leona flinched, heart lurching into her throat. Thomas shouted something inaudible under the rush of movement. But Axel was faster. Like a shadow that had been waiting for its cue, the old German shepherd lunged forward, not to maul, not to attack, but to block. He slid directly into Calder's path just as the man made a break for the side door. Teeth bared, fur bristling, Axel planted his body low, immovable, primal, and utterly certain. Calder stumbled to a halt, skidding in the grain dust and wood rot. For a split second, his hand moved toward his belt, as if instinctively reaching for a weapon. But there was nothing there. Thomas didn't hesitate. He slammed into Calder from behind, both of them hitting the ground hard. The air burst from Calder's lungs in a grunt. Leona rushed forward as Thomas flipped him onto his back and pinned his arm behind him with a rough practice twist. "Try that again," Thomas growled, "and you'll leave this mill in pieces." Calder didn't fight back. He didn't scream. He didn't even look surprised. He just crumpled, eyes wide, breath hitching in shallow, uneven sobs. His voice came out barely louder than the moan of the wind outside. I didn't want to leave her there." Leona crouched, her voice sharp but trembling. "Then why did you?" Calder blinked up at the broken beams above, as if the truth might be written somewhere in the dust. "I was told to," he rasped. "I didn't choose this. By who?" Tomas snapped. A long silence. Then Calder turned his face to the side toward the rot-blackened wall, as if ashamed to meet their eyes. I thought I was doing the right thing. They said if I kept the baby, we'd all be in danger. Maris, me, everyone." Axel growled again, not a warning, but a guttural sound of unease, as if even he could smell the rot in the man's story. "They?" Leona asked. "Who are they, Calder?" His mouth opened, but no words came out at first. His face was pale, jaw trembling. "There's a man," he finally whispered. "He came a few weeks ago. Said he was from a government agency, didn't show a badge, but he knew things. About our home, our history. He said the baby was marked, that if we kept her, others would come looking." Thomas's grip tightened. "So, you threw your daughter into a river because a stranger told you she was dangerous?" "No!" Calder gasped. "I didn't throw her. I left her at the bridge in a basket. It was supposed to be temporary. He said someone would find her. Said it was better than what was coming." "What's coming?" Leona asked, her voice quiet, razor sharp. Calder's lips quivered. "I don't know," he said. He wouldn't say, just that she wasn't born the way the rest of us are. That she... He stopped himself. A beat of silence stretched between them. Wind slipped through the crack in the broken door, scattering dry leaves across the floor like whispers. "She what?" Tomas pressed. Calder turned his face back toward them. "She's not normal," he said. "Her eyes, when she was born, they were open, and she didn't cry. She just looked at me, like she knew everything. The man said she was part of something bigger, a remnant." Leona stood, cold crawling down her spine like melting snow. "Where is this man now?" "I don't know," Calder murmured. "He vanished after that night, left no name, no address, just a warning. If anyone asked, I was never supposed to speak of it." Axel moved closer then, pressing his nose near Calder's chest. Not aggressive, almost sorrowful, like he sensed something deeper than panic, something broken. Tomas let go of Calder's arm slowly and stood, rubbing his temples. "This is more than abandonment," he muttered. "This is a cover-up." Leona didn't respond. Her eyes were on Axel, on the way he stared at Calder with a gaze both ancient and immediate, as if weighing a man's soul. She turned to Thomas. "We need to bring him back. The villagers will demand answers." Thomas nodded grimly. "And so will I." Calder didn't resist as they pulled him to his feet. His legs shook, but he followed without protest. Behind them, Axel waited at the doorway, silhouetted by a sky that had turned a deeper shade of gray. Somewhere in the distance a raven called once, sharp and alone. The first thing they noticed was how quiet Calder had become. Back in the village square, he sat hunched on the edge of the well, shoulders slack, eyes trained on the ground like a man condemned. The whispers had begun already, trickling like cold water through the watching crowd. Words like traitor, coward, and curse floated on the wind. Thomas stood nearby, arms folded, posture tense. His jaw worked like he was grinding down his fury. Leona hovered behind him, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her gaze flicking between Calder and the villagers. The baby was still with Dr. Gareth, still breathing, but just barely. "What you did wasn't just reckless," Thomas said lowly, voice edged with control. "You endangered a child. You broke this village's trust." "I was trying to protect her," Calder whispered. "You don't know what I saw, what he told me." "Then start talking," Thomas shot back. "Now!" The tension was thick, the kind that made people lean in without realizing. The younger villagers stepped closer. A woman gasped when Calder mentioned the stranger, the one without a name. But then Axel growled. It wasn't loud, but it sliced through the murmurs like a bell at a funeral. Leona turned instantly. Axel's fur had risen along his shoulders. He stood rigid beside Tomas, ears trained toward the edge of the square, where the shadows of the old granary blended into the trees beyond. A shape moved. Then a man stepped into the light, tall, lean, with silver-white hair tied at the nape and eyes that held years behind them like river stones hold time. Silas. The villagers fell into silence as the elder approached, the soft tap of his cane on packed earth the only sound for several heartbeats. His presence parted the crowd without a word, out of reverence, out of fear, or both. Tomas straightened. "Silas?" "I heard the dog," Silas said calmly, voice like wind against birch. "He's never growled at shadows for no reason." Axel sat now, ears still alert, but quiet, acknowledging the man like a soldier greeting a higher rank. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop," Silas added, stepping closer. "But perhaps it's time someone else spoke." Leona exchanged a glance with Tomas. The villagers held their breath as the elder faced Calder, who seemed to shrink beneath that gaze. "You speak of a man with no name," Silas said, "of warnings and curses. I believe you." Calder looked up sharply, startled. "You do?" Silas nodded once. "Because I met him too." A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd like a gust of wind. "What?" Tomas asked, voice suddenly hoarse. Silas's eyes didn't waver. "He came to my home the night before the baby was found. Asked for records, family lines, strange questions about birth dates and disappearances. He knew too much about things long buried." Leona stepped forward. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Silas looked past her at the villagers. "Because fear is a wildfire, and when it spreads, it devours truth along with lies." He turned back to Calder. "What you did was wrong, son, but I believe you were manipulated, used." Calder lowered his head, a sound breaking in his throat that wasn't quite a sob. "And the baby?" someone asked from the crowd. Silas turned toward them slowly. "That child," he said, "survived a river swollen with death. She didn't cry, didn't thrash. She simply waited until the dog came." His gaze fell on Axel, who sat stone still watching. "We can choose to believe it was luck, or we can believe what's always been true in this village, There are forces we do not understand, but they come to us for a reason. The crowd shifted uneasily. But, Silas continued, if someone wants that baby gone badly enough to send a man like that, we must ask why, and we must protect her. Tomas exhaled, slow and long. Leona's heart beat against her ribs like a warning bell. She looked down at Axel, who had risen again, silent, unwavering. He, too, was watching the edge of the woods, as if someone else might be listening still. Silas's voice had always carried weight in Eldon Creek. It was the voice that blessed newborns at the winter festival, the one that told stories around the fire that made children both dream and fear. But now, that voice was different, not louder, just colder. And what it said made the air itself recoil. "Yes," he said simply, gaze steady, as if he were announcing the weather. "I ordered Calder to abandon the child." A stunned silence fell. Thomas blinked, as if trying to clear smoke from his eyes. Leona went still, her breath caught mid-inhale. "You what?" she finally managed. Silas didn't flinch. "It had to be done. That child was never meant to be part of this village." "Never meant to?" Thomas stepped forward, fury flashing beneath his confusion. "You sent Calder to throw a baby into the river?" "I spared the village a slow corruption," Silas said evenly. "What you see as cruelty was preservation." Axel gave a low, warning growl, but this time Silas didn't look at him. Instead, he looked to the villagers. "You remember what happened 20 years ago?" he said, scanning their stunned faces. "How we nearly lost our entire winter crop. The stillbirths. The fever that killed 9 of our elders." Murmurs stirred. Faces paled. "We recovered," Silas continued, "because we culled what was weak, because we kept our bloodline pure, our land untouched by strangers." Leona's voice trembled, but it didn't break. "You're saying this baby is a threat?" "She is a mistake," Silas answered. "Her mother was unfaithful. Her father is not Calder. That child carries blood from outside, and once it flows through our line, we lose everything." The weight of the words fell like stone. "You talk about blood," Thomas said, disgust rising in every syllable, "like this is livestock, not a child." Silas looked at him. "Blood is memory. Blood is survival. Our ancestors knew this. You may not see it, but the land remembers." A few of the older villagers shifted uncomfortably, but most stood frozen, staring as if the man before them had ripped off a mask they didn't know he wore. Maris, who had stood silently near the clinic's door, took a faltering step forward. Her face was blotched with tears, eyes hollowed by exhaustion, but her voice rang clear. "You told Calder I cheated," she said. "You whispered it to him when I was sleeping. You said the child wasn't his." "She isn't," Silas said without apology. "You lied," Maris said. "You poisoned his mind." "I told him what his instincts already feared," Silas replied. "It only took a push." Calder looked up now, his face ashen. I thought I was protecting us," he murmured. "You were manipulated," Thomas said, stepping between him and Silas. "You were used." Silas raised his chin. "Better one infant lost than a village undone." Leona's hands were clenched now, nails biting into her palms. "You think purity justifies murder?" "I think survival has always required sacrifice," Silas said. Axel suddenly stepped forward, teeth slightly bared. He didn't lunge. He didn't bark. He simply stood between Silas and the others, body low, eyes locked. A protector. A warning. Silas stared down at him. Even your dog understands. Blood matters. But Axel didn't blink. He didn't back away. And that was answer enough. Dr. Gareth's voice came from behind them. It was quiet, measured. The child is stable now. She'll live. Heads turned. She has a strong heartbeat, Gareth continued, and lungs like she's made of thunder. Maris gasped softly. Leona took a step toward her, steadying her. She will live, Leona said, her voice iron now, and so will the truth. Silas looked around the circle at the eyes that had once trusted him, now clouded in disbelief, at the faces that no longer bowed, at the animal who saw through every falsehood. He didn't plead, he didn't deny, he simply turned and walked toward the edge of the trees, not banished, but broken. And behind him, in the center of the village that once revered him, stood a newborn wrapped in cloth, alive, unwelcome, and unforgettable. The woods swallowed Silas in silence, but shadows that retreat do not always disappear. Thomas stood near the old stone well, brushing dirt from his sleeve, unaware that death was watching from 10 paces away. Leona had just stepped out of the clinic to breathe. The door creaked behind her. The world was trying to feel normal again, and Axel, still limping from his earlier run, lay curled beside the porch, one eye half open, chest rising in uneven rhythm. Maris and the baby were inside, safe. For now. Then a twig snapped. Not loud, but not right either. Axel's head lifted. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just rose like a tide, soundless and sure. Leona turned, eyes narrowing. "Tomas?" "I heard it," he said, hand resting instinctively on his belt, though no weapon hung there anymore. That's when Silas struck. He came from behind a stack of firewood, a glint of metal catching the dusk, a blade old but honed drawn from the folds of his cloak like it had always been part of him. He went for Thomas first, fast, precise, the kind of precision that didn't come from rage, but from conviction. But Axel moved first. With a sound like thunder being torn in half, he launched. The blade meant for Thomas tore into Axel's side instead, just under the ribs. A sickening sound. Then blood. Axel didn't stop. He slammed into Silas with his full weight, jaws catching fabric and flesh, dragging the man down into the gravel. Thomas shouted, Leona screamed, but it all came through molasses. Axel and Silas tumbled, tangled in fury and pain. The blade clattered away, skidding beneath the wooden steps. And then it was Axel who stood. Barely. Legs trembling, side slick with blood, one eye squeezed shut. He didn't bite again. He didn't need to. Silas lay on the ground, arm bent at an unnatural angle, mouth gaping in shock. The look of a man who thought he was fulfilling prophecy and realized too late that no one believed in him anymore. Leona rushed forward. "Axel!" She dropped to her knees beside him. Her hands fluttered uselessly over his wound as if willing the blood to return inside. "Stay with me. Stay with me." Thomas kicked the blade away, then grabbed Silas by the collar. "You coward. You tried to kill them." "You tried to kill him." Silas spat dirt, voice cracking. "It's not murder. It's cleansing." But the words had no power now. Behind them, the sound of running feet. Villagers. One by one they froze at the edge of the clearing. Faces pale, eyes wide. The illusion shattered. "What did he do?" a young man whispered. "He tried to kill them," Tomas said flatly. And Axel stopped him. Blood dripped steadily from Axel's side, but he remained upright, chest heaving, eyes locked on Silas like a sentinel carved from the mountain. Maris appeared in the doorway, baby in arms. She saw the blood, the crowd, the blade, and then Axel. Her knees buckled. She clutched the baby tighter and said nothing, but her eyes said everything. An elder stepped forward. Mira, who'd once sewn clothes for every child in the village. Her voice shook. "Silas, why?" He looked at them all one by one, as if still hoping for a single nod, a single spark of loyalty. None came. He was alone, not banished, not exiled, forgotten. Thomas bound Silas's hands with leather twine. "He'll answer for this." Leona pressed a cloth to Axel's wound. Her hands were steady now, but her voice broke. "You saved us again," she whispered. Axel didn't whine, didn't cry. He just leaned against her, as if to say, "I would do it every time." Morning came slowly, as if even the sun was hesitant to return. The storm had passed, but something heavier still hung in the air, an ache that wasn't just about weather. It was about trust, about the quiet dismantling of a story the village thought it understood. Silas was no longer the man they brought bread to on Sundays. He was now the man behind a locked wooden door in the town hall's cellar. And Calder had finally spoken. Tomas stood before the villagers in the square, his voice firm but not cruel. He was blackmailed. Silas threatened to reveal debts, mistakes, some from long ago. Told him if he didn't follow orders, he'd lose everything, including Maris, including the baby. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Not anger, not yet. Just disbelief unraveling in the morning light. Calder sat slumped on the steps, wrists unbound now but still trembling. He had confessed just after dawn, eyes hollow, hands clenched until the knuckles went white. "I didn't want to do it," he had whispered. "I thought maybe if I just left her where someone might find her, it wouldn't be murder, just removal." No one had spoken for a long while after that. Now, villagers gathered near the well, arms folded, gazes cast downward. The old baker, whose hands never stopped kneading even when his wife passed, asked softly, "But why? Why would Silas do this? Over bloodlines? That's not who we are." Leona stood beside Thomas, arms still streaked with Axel's dried blood. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "It's not who we are, but maybe it's who he always was. We just didn't want to see it." An elder woman nodded slowly, clutching her shawl tighter. "He used our reverence as a shield." Behind them, the clinic door creaked open. Dr. Gareth stepped out, face drawn with exhaustion, but eyes resolute. "She's alive," he said. "The baby. She made it through the night." A breath swept through the crowd like wind through leaves. Then, from within the clinic, came a soft shuffle. Axel, bandaged, limping, but walking. The crowd parted instinctively as he stepped into the light. His fur was matted, his breathing shallow, but his gaze was as sharp as ever. No one doubted what they saw in those eyes. He knew, and he stayed, beside the child, beside Maris, even beside Calder, as if watching over the line between remorse and redemption. Children stared wide-eyed. One boy whispered, "He's not just a dog, he's a guardian." No one corrected him. Maris approached slowly, cradling her daughter. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Her name is Soline." Leona met her eyes. "Light." Maris nodded. "That's what she is. That's what she'll be." A man in the back, usually the loudest at village meetings, cleared his throat. "What happens now?" Thomas didn't hesitate. "Now, we start telling the truth about what happened, about how close we came to losing our way." Axel let out a low, steady breath. His tail thumped once against the dirt. The village, wounded but still standing, began, finally, to awaken. The jailhouse wasn't built for shame, but it wore it well that morning. Two figures sat behind the iron-barred door in silence. Calder, hunched, wringing his hands like he could wring away the guilt, and Silas, upright, unmoved, as if walls and locks were beneath him. Tomas stood at the threshold, still smeared with the dried evidence of the night before. His badge glinted, but there was no triumph in it, only weight. He turned to the deputy and nodded. "Keep them separated. No visitors?" No whispers passed under the door. "Aye," the deputy replied, locking the final bolt. Outside, the villagers lingered, not out of vengeance, but confusion. How do you reconcile betrayal when it came with decades of blessings and counsel? Inside the clinic, Dr. Gareth's hands moved with the steadiness of someone who had seen too much to be shaken. Axel lay on a pallet, ribs rising slowly beneath the bandages. The knife had missed anything vital, but only just. A half-inch to the right, and "He'll walk again," Gareth said softly, glancing up at Leona. "But he won't be chasing shadows for a while." Leona knelt beside the dog, brushing the fur gently away from his eyes. "He doesn't need to," she murmured. "He already caught the darkest one." Axel's tail thumped once in response. Even now the warrior still listened. In the corner, Maris sat holding Soline, her expression not of relief but reckoning. When Leona approached, she looked up with eyes that had aged 10 years in one day. "It started small," Maris whispered. "Calder used to come home talking about legacy, about protecting what's pure. I thought it was just pride. Silas fed it to him in tiny doses like poison you don't notice until it's in your bones." Leona said nothing. She let the silence speak for them both. Maris continued, voice shaking. "He made Calder believe our child didn't belong because my mother was from the outside, because she had different eyes. Silas called it a stain, said the village would never accept it, that he had a duty to act." She looked down at her daughter, now sleeping, fingers curled like petals. "I didn't know how far he'd go. By the time I did, Calder had already unraveled. I woke up and they were both gone." Her tears came slowly, but they came. Across the room, Gareth stood still, hands on the back of a chair. "This village," he said quietly, "has trusted the wrong voices for too long." Outside, Thomas addressed the gathering crowd. The words weren't easy, but they were necessary. "We've arrested Silas under charges of attempted murder and conspiracy. Calder is being held for endangerment and attempted infanticide. The council will convene. But more than that, we'll need to reckon with what we allowed." Some faces turned away. Others stared forward, eyes burning not with rage, but awakening. "It doesn't end with jailing 2 men, Tomas said. "It ends when we stop choosing silence because it's comfortable." A murmur of assent, hesitant, but growing. Axel stirred again, as if sensing the shift. In that moment it became clear. This was not just justice for a night's violence. It was the beginning of digging out an old root one, long hidden beneath quiet gardens and inherited smiles. Morning crept gently over the village, casting golden light across the rooftops as if trying to mend what night had broken. Inside the clinic, Warmth replaced urgency. The air was quiet now. No more gasps, no more blood-slicked hands, just the hush of recovery and the rhythmic breath of a child cradled to her mother's chest. Maris sat upright on the cot, hair still unkempt, shoulders tired but steady. In her arms, the baby slept peacefully, cheeks tinged with the softest blush of returning life. A miracle with a pulse. "She's strong," Dr. Gareth said softly from the doorway, arms folded. "Just like her mother." Maris gave a small smile, eyes never leaving the child. "I don't know if I'm strong. I just couldn't lose her too." Leona sat nearby, her hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. Axel lay at her feet, still bandaged, but alert, one ear cocked toward every sound, as if he no longer trusted peace to last. "I think you are," Leona said. "You walked through the fire and didn't burn down. That's something." Maris blinked slowly, then looked down at her daughter. "She needs a name. I didn't get to give her one before." Her voice caught, the rest left unsaid. Leona waited, giving her space. "I want to call her Soline," Maris said finally. "It means sunlight." She stroked the baby's tiny hand. "Because of what Axel did. He pulled her out of the dark. He brought her back to me, like the sun climbing over the edge of a storm." Leona's throat tightened. She looked down at the dog, whose tail gave a single gentle thump. "Soline," she echoed, nodding. "It suits her." Outside, bells rang softly from the chapel tower. Not for morning. For morning. A subtle distinction, but it meant everything now. "I don't know how to raise her alone," Maris whispered. "You're not alone," Leona said, her voice firm but kind. "Not anymore." She leaned forward, her hand resting over Maris's. "I'll stay, as long as you need, as long as she needs." Maris looked up, eyes filling. "Why?" Leona shrugged gently. "Because when the world gets dark, someone has to light a lantern. You just did. I'm just helping you keep it lit." Axel stirred, letting out a quiet huff, as if in agreement. The baby shifted in her mother's arms, then sighed a soft, airy sound that carried more life than an entire room of sermons. Soline. A name like a promise. The path back to the cabin was slow. Axel limped beside Leona, his gait uneven but determined, each step a quiet defiance against the injury that had nearly taken him. The bandage around his ribs was fresh, spotted with the red memory of a blade meant for someone else. Leona walked in silence, her hand occasionally brushing his fur, both a guide and a tether. The forest opened gently before them, branches shifting with morning wind, the hush of birdsong threading through pine. At the clearing, the old cabin stood waiting, weathered by years, warmed by memory. Leona pushed the door open and let him inside first. No commands, no leash, just trust. Axel sniffed the air, circled once, and curled beside the fireplace. Leona knelt to remove his wrappings. Her fingers trembled as they touched the wound. "You saved him, boy," she whispered. "And me." Axel didn't move, but his eyes met hers, deep, steady, knowing. She'd seen that look before, years ago. The flashback came like smoke curling under a door. Axel, lean and sharp-eyed, crouched beside his handler in a desert of silence. Wind swept across broken stone. Somewhere beneath the rubble, a life was buried. Axel's ears flicked forward. Then, without warning, he bolted, digging, barking, faster than hands could catch up. Moments later, a small cry pierced the dust. A child. buried beneath a collapsed school, alive because of him. Another memory, the last mission. Rain lashed an alley in a war-torn city. Axel lunged through gunfire to pull his partner behind cover. Seconds later, the wall exploded. Shrapnel, smoke, silence. The man didn't make it. Axel sat beside the body for hours before reinforcements arrived, unmoving, guarding, mourning. After that, no more deployments. He was retired, a term too neat for a soul still shaped by duty. Back in the cabin, Axel twitched in his sleep. A low whine escaped him. Leona placed a hand on his flank, grounding him. His breath evened out. "You never stopped working," she murmured, "even when they said your time was done." She rose, stirred the fire, and set a bowl of broth near his paws. He didn't touch it yet, just watched her with the quiet loyalty of those who've seen the worst and stayed kind. "Maybe this place, maybe we both needed this," she said aloud. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere we're not someone's weapon." She sat beside him, back against the wall, legs pulled in. The hours passed without urgency. No sirens, no orders, just the rhythm of breath and crackle of flame. Outside, the trees swayed gently. Life, unrushed, unresolved, pressed forward. Inside, a scarred dog rested without armor, and for the first time in years, Axel didn't brace for a call. He was home. Maris stood at the edge of the market square, baby Soline cradled in a woven sling against her chest. The morning sun filtered through the tree canopy overhead, dappling the path in fragments of gold and shadow. Around her, villagers busied themselves stacking crates, weighing produce, haggling in soft tones, but their eyes flicked toward her like birds, unsure whether to flee or settle. Some smiled, uncertain but not unkind. Others didn't bother to hide the glances or the half-whispered sentences that never quite reached her ears but always her spine. "She's the one. Poor child. But how do we know? Silas would never have—" She adjusted Soline's sling, kept walking. It wasn't shame that made her quiet. It was exhaustion, the kind that sat not in the muscles, but behind the eyes. In the memory of waking to find her baby gone, of running barefoot down her street, screaming her daughter's name into a dawn that offered no answer. She approached a vendor's stall and asked softly for carrots. The woman behind the table, May, who used to sew little bonnets for Soline before she was born, hesitated. Maris offered a few coins, but May waved them off awkwardly. "Take them." "Please," Maris said. "I want to pay." An older man nearby muttered under his breath, "Does guilt buy vegetables now?" Maris froze. Before she could respond, Leona stepped between them. "What it buys," she said, voice clear and steady, "is a chance at dignity." The man looked up. "You think she didn't know?" "I think she's still standing," Leona replied. "And that's more than I can say for some of us." A few heads turned. Conversations paused. Maris looked down, her eyes glistening, but not from shame. Relief, perhaps. The kind that arrives when someone else finally picks up the weight you didn't know was crushing you. Later, outside the small schoolhouse, Tomas leaned against the porch railing, watching the children play. His eyes weren't on the kids, though. They were on the row of ledgers he'd borrowed from the archive. Records, names, votes, donations, decisions. Silas's influence had deep roots. Over the past 20 years, he had orchestrated quiet changes in policy ones that slowly isolated certain families, discouraged outside marriages, and centralized decision-making under the guise of tradition. Calder hadn't been his only pawn, just the most desperate. Tomas flipped another page. Another signature. Another thread in the net. He made us believe protection meant control, Tomas muttered to himself. Inside the schoolhouse, Leona read to the children. Maris sat in the back, Soline asleep against her chest, the rise and fall of the baby's breath matching the rhythm of the story. It wasn't much, a small gesture, but it was a beginning. Outside, the wind shifted. Whispers still followed her, but now they mixed with silence. And sometimes, in that silence, a hand would reach out. A smile would linger. A door would stay open just a little longer. Rebuilding trust wasn't loud. It was the sound of someone staying. 6 weeks had passed since that night in the mill, since the blade, the blood, the breaking of trust. The village was healing, in its own slow and awkward way. Fences were mended in silence. Bread was left on doorsteps with no notes. And while the whispers hadn't fully faded, they were no longer edged with suspicion, just uncertainty. Wounds take time. So did Axel. The old German shepherd moved slower now. A deep scar ran beneath the fresh fur on his side, a reminder of the knife that should have taken his life. But his eyes were as alert as ever. And when Maris entered Leona's porch that morning with baby Soline in her arms, Axel rose to his feet stiffly, but with purpose. Maris laid a soft blanket on the wooden floor and gently placed Soline down. The baby was 5 months old now, wrapped in a yellow onesie 2 sizes too big. Her fists clenched instinctively, face scrunched from the sun that filtered through the open window. Axel trotted over and stopped. He lowered his massive head slowly, sniffing the edge of the blanket. Soline blinked, lips parted in a tiny O of curiosity. Then, without warning, she laughed. Not a coo, not a giggle, a bright, uninhibited burst of joy-like bells in springtime. Maris froze. So did Leona, standing by the doorway with a mug of tea. Axel pulled back slightly, startled. Then he leaned forward again, nudging her with his snout. Soline let out another laugh, this time louder, mouth open in glee, feet kicking. Tears welled in Maris's eyes. She's never done that before, she whispered. Leona set the mug down and stepped closer. Not even with you? Maris shook her head. She smiles sometimes. But that was a real laugh. Axel now lay beside the blanket, tail thumping once, twice. Careful not to get too close, but clearly not leaving. Soline reached for his ear. He didn't move. And then she squealed, tiny, delighted, her fingers brushing his fur as if it were silk spun from light itself. It was a small moment, but in villages like theirs, small moments are the ones that echo. News of the laugh spread quietly, then quickly. May, the vendor, told her sister told the baker. By dusk, half the village knew that the baby who wasn't supposed to survive, the child some feared would bring shame, had laughed, and she'd laughed only for the dog who nearly gave his life to protect her. That night Leona sat beside the fireplace, Axel's head resting on her foot. She stared into the flames, letting the warmth soak into her tired skin. She chose him, she said softly, as if she remembered, as if somewhere in her tiny heart she knew who kept her alive. Axel didn't respond, but his eyes, those calm, ancient eyes, blinked once, slow and sure. 3 days later, Maris returned to the village square with Soline in her arms. For the first time, no one looked away. A boy about 7 walked up with a small plush rabbit in his hand. "Is it true she only laughs for the dog?" Maris smiled. "You can try." The boy wiggled the rabbit. Celine stared. No sound. Maris crouched, held her daughter at eye level, then pointed toward the path behind them. Axel padded into view. Celine saw him and burst into laughter again. The boy gasped. Then something wonderful happened. He laughed too, and in that moment something shifted, not in headlines, not in decrees, but in the air between people, in the hush of judgment softening into curiosity, in a child's giggle that answered another, in the soft step of a shepherd dog who'd found, after all this time, a place that still needed him. The council hall had not seen this many elders gathered in over a decade. Its long wooden table, scarred by time and weather, sat beneath the stained glass crest of the village, light streaming in muted blues and greens. The walls still smelled faintly of beeswax and iron, but today the air felt heavier, like grief or the moment before confession. Thomas stood near the window, arms crossed, his presence unspoken but firm. He was not an elder, but he had earned his place there through action, and what they had to reckon with could no longer be handled by tradition alone. Silas was gone, not buried yet, held in quiet detainment at the edge of the village, away from whispers and thrown stones. But his name had begun to rot, like fruit hidden too long beneath clean linen. "What do we even say?" muttered Elder Holland, eyes fixed on the knot in the table before him. "That the man who led our prayers, who named our children, could justify killing one?" No one replied, until Elder Ivor, the oldest among them, cleared his throat and placed a leather-bound book on the table. Its corners were frayed, pages yellowed with time. "I found this," he said, voice hoarse, "in the back of the archives. It belonged to my father. He was a scribe before me." The room leaned in. Thomas took a step forward. Ivor flipped the book open slowly, revealing cursive script in a hand long dead. He tapped a page marked with a pressed leaf. "March, year of the flood, a child born of uncertain parentage was taken, deemed unfit to bear the name of the Hollow." Silence. Elder Marin blinked. "Taken? What does that mean?" Ivor looked at her, and then at the others. "It means what you think it does." A cold hush settled across the room. Another elder whispered, "You're saying this has happened before?" Ivor nodded. 3 times. Over the last 60 years. Always a baby. Always hidden under some excuse. A storm, a fever, a failed birth. But in the margins, the truth. Quietly noted, never spoken aloud. Thomas's jaw tensed. And Silas knew. Ivor met his eyes. He didn't invent this. He inherited it. And worse, he believed it righteous. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the tall windows. The village beyond moved like any other day. Children ran, bread was baked. But within the hall, time itself seemed to stall. Marin pressed a hand to her chest. "We let him guide us. We let him hold weddings and funerals. Gods, we thanked him for wisdom." "It was never wisdom," Holland snapped. "It was control and fear, dressed in the robes of piety." Tomas stepped forward, laying one hand on the journal. "Then we tell the truth." They turned to him. "We tell them what was done, what has been done, and we vow on record, in writing, that it ends now. No more secrets. No more lines drawn in blood behind locked doors. There was a beat. Then Marin nodded. "Let it be known," she whispered, "that this legacy dies with Silas." Later that evening, Leona joined Tomas outside the hall. She had heard from Maris what was uncovered, and her face bore the weight of knowing too much. And finally, knowing why the shadows had always felt thicker in some corners of their history. "He didn't act alone," she said softly, standing beside him as they looked out over the village green. "Not truly." "No," Thomas agreed, "but he believed he had the right. That's the rot we have to dig up." Behind them, the church bell rang. 6 chimes for dusk. Axel padded up to them, his limp barely noticeable now. He sat by Tomas's side, eyes watchful, steady, as if he too sensed the shift beneath the soil of this place. And somewhere in a quiet home near the woods, Soline stirred in her sleep fingers curling in a dream. The past could no longer hide. And at last the hollow was beginning to wake. The air was different by the creek, not colder, not quite, but still in that way that made skin crawl, like even the trees held their breath. Leona stepped over a cluster of moss-covered stones, boots sinking into soft earth. Tomas followed close behind, the journal they had borrowed from the elders tucked beneath his arm. And ahead of them, nose low and body tense, was Axel. He hadn't barked once. But ever since they turned down the winding trail toward Eldon Creek, something in him had changed. His pace quickened, his shoulders stiffened, and now, here at the bank, he froze, then growled, low from his chest. Leona stopped, instantly alert, Axel's ears pinned back. He stepped toward a patch of disturbed ground, near the water barely visible beneath the brambles. But something in the pattern was wrong. The earth was uneven, too smooth in one spot, too shallow in another, like it had been turned and pressed back, not by time, but by hands. "Tomas," she called gently. He was already kneeling beside her, brushing aside dead leaves. The journal pages flapped softly in the breeze as he opened to a marked entry. "June. A girl named Elira went missing after the spring thaw. Slipped on rocks, they said. Swept away. No body ever found." Leona's gaze drifted to the water. It trickled on, silent and innocent. "They lied," she whispered. Tomas didn't answer. Axel sniffed the soil again, then sat back with a deep exhale, eyes on them. Not a warning, a knowing. They spent the rest of the morning retracing the banks, comparing entries with locations. The pattern became clear, too many accidents along one lonely stretch of Eldon Creek. Children, young mothers, all with some whisper of shame attached to them, unwed, sickly, or different in ways the village hadn't tolerated. It was cleansing, they had said. Mercy, tradition, no longer. By dusk they stood beside the largest stone barely marked, half sunken, and placed a ribbon around it. "For every name unspoken," Leona said. She knelt and pressed her palm to the cold granite. "I don't know if anyone ever grieved you properly," she whispered. "But we see you now, and that matters." Behind her, Thomas bowed his head. Later, in the village square, a notice was posted. "A memorial will be held to honor the lost, the silenced, the hidden." Some villagers read it and nodded with quiet acceptance. Others hesitated, but the silence was breaking. Truth, long buried, was beginning to breathe again. That night, Leona sat outside her cottage, watching stars blink into place. Axel lay beside her, head on his paws, eyes closed but ears still twitching. "You knew," she murmured. "Didn't you?" He gave no answer, only a soft sigh. But in his stillness was the kind of knowing no language could hold. Behind them, a baby laughed once, faint, warm, from Maris's home across the lane. Soline. And somewhere in the dark soil of Eldon Creek, the first buds of justice stirred. The bell rang once, then twice. And with each echo across the square, shutters cracked open, footsteps shuffled, and voices murmured beneath breath. By the third toll, the people of Eldon Hollow had gathered beneath lantern light and clouded sky for something they hadn't held in decades. A reckoning. The meeting was called at Thomas's request. But tonight, it wasn't his voice they would hear. It was hers. Maris stood just behind the steps of the town hall, hidden in shadow, heart pounding so hard it made her breath come shallow. She could see them, the faces she grew up with, some familiar, some aging, some twisted now in discomfort, in doubt. Leona placed a gentle hand on her back. "You can walk away if it's too much." But it was Axel who shifted beside her that made Maris pause. The big dog looked up, meeting her eyes, not with command, not even with concern, with faith. He nudged her leg gently, a silent cue. Maris exhaled. "I can't walk away," she whispered. She stepped into the light. Murmurs rose, some startled, some cold, some confused. A few looked away, but no one left. She climbed the 2 wooden steps, stood behind the simple pine podium, and for a moment said nothing. Only the wind moved. "I never thought I'd stand here," Maris said softly, hands trembling as they gripped the edge of the podium. "Not after what happened, not after what you let happen." A silence like sharp glass followed. "But I'm not here for revenge," she continued. "I'm here because my daughter, our daughter, is alive. And if not for those who chose truth over comfort, she wouldn't be." Her voice cracked at daughter, but she held her ground. "I know there are those of you who want to move on, who say this was a mistake of a few not of the village, that we should bury it again, like we did so many others." She paused, then looked up. "But I ask you, how many graves are enough? How many names lost to silence do we allow before we stop calling it tradition and start calling it what it is?" No one spoke. Maris looked to the side, to Axel sitting just off stage, his gaze steady on her. The weight of his stare reminded her she had faced death. She had buried her voice in shame, but she had survived. My child was marked for disappearance because of who her father was, because of fear, and no one spoke up for her, except a dog. She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. That dog risked his life for a baby no one else would touch, and somehow, I think that makes him more human than most. A ripple of emotion passed through the crowd, unease, maybe even guilt. Maris took a breath. "You don't have to like me, but if you care about this village, if you truly believe it can be more than its past, then do not forget what was done in your name." Silence followed as she stepped down. Then, from the back, an old woman with a lace shawl rose slowly to her feet. "I remember the girl before Elira," she said, voice wavering. "They said she drowned in the flood of 72, but I saw Silas leading her away." A younger man stood next. My uncle left town suddenly the year his girlfriend was with child. They said he was unstable. But now, a wave of quiet voices began to stir each like sparks in dry grass. But across the square not everyone was moved. A man with a deep scar along his neck growled low, "This isn't justice. It's revenge dressed in mourning clothes." "Let the dead stay buried," another barked. Arguments began to splinter. Thomas stepped forward, raising a hand. "Enough!" The murmuring halted. "This is not about tearing the village apart. It's about finally stitching together what was left in pieces," he said. "If there is still rot in the walls, let's face it together, or we're just inviting it to fester again." No cheers, no applause. Just hard silence and eyes filled with reckoning. That night, Maris didn't speak a word on the walk home. But when they reached her porch, she sank to her knees beside Axel, pressing her forehead gently to his. "You stayed with me," she whispered. Axel let out a quiet huff, leaning into her. Across the yard, Leona stood with Soline swaddled in her arms. The baby stirred, one tiny hand peeking out, reaching absently toward the shape of the dog, toward light in the dark. The great oak in Eldon Hollow had witnessed centuries of secrets, but today it stood silent as truth broke the village's hush. Maris stood at its base, no shawl, no makeup, just presence. Around her, villagers formed quiet arcs. Some stared, others whispered about the woman who vanished and returned with a baby and a storm. To her sides stood Leona, once a soldier, and Thomas, always watching where fractures might form. At Maris's feet lay Axel, unmoving yet alert. A sentinel. She didn't ask for forgiveness. "I was 17 when I fell in love with Calder, 18 when I was pregnant. Then Calder vanished. Silas came instead." The crowd shifted. "I was told I was going to the midwife, but I woke in a barn, chained. A man said my baby would restore some holy balance." Gasps. "I gave birth alone, feverish. My daughter's name is Soline." Her hand brushed a scar. "And then a dog came." Her voice broke. "Axel found us, covered in blood. He nudged my baby until she cried. That sound saved me." Leona stepped forward. "I heard that bark. I found them." Thomas added, "I followed Leona, because some stories deserve to be heard." Maris turned back. "I'm not here to reopen wounds. I'm here because they never closed." She knelt beside Axel. This dog took no sides. He just knew. Soline, nestled in Leona's arms, gurgled at Axel. Some villagers wiped their eyes. "I don't expect your pity, but I won't let my daughter grow up in shadows." A silence. Then a voice broke it. "May I see her?" It was Elswith, the baker's widow. She peered in and whispered, "She has your mother's eyes." One by one, villagers stepped closer, not with embrace, but with acknowledgement. The dawn came gray, solemn. At the southern gate, Silas stood in shackles. 40 villagers gathered, enough to witness, not to riot. A constable read the charges: unlawful confinement, coercion, medical malpractice, conspiracy. Silas didn't flinch, but when his eyes met Axel's, something shifted recognition and fear. The cart rolled away, carrying silence with it. Then Calder stepped forward. "I knew," he said, hoarse. "Silas threatened to ruin me. I helped isolate her. Then I stopped caring." He faced Thomas. I surrender. I ask no forgiveness, but hope to earn it. Leona approached. No shackles, just a nod. Come, Thomas said. There's a process now. Later that evening, under the same oak, villagers laid stones, not to mourn Silas, but to mark the turning. Leona approached Maris. He turned himself in. It's not everything, Maris said. No, but it's a start. They watched in silence as people reshaped memory, not erase it. Axel sat nearby. Soline nestled warm against her mother. I think she knows, Maris whispered, that the village has changed. Healing had begun. The next morning, sunlight touched the rooftops gently. At the river bend, a wooden platform stood amid wildflowers. A carved oak plaque read, "In honor of Axel, who saw the unseen, who guarded the forgotten, who gave us back our light." Beside it, a paw print in concrete. Mayor Eldrick spoke. This village saw darkness, but also courage from a young mother, from those who chose truth, and most of all, from a dog. He turned toward Axel, a dog who didn't ask permission. He just acted. And so, a new day was declared, Axel Day. No pomp, just pause. A holiday of presence. Leona crouched beside Axel, offering a pine cone. First thing he brought me. Thought it was a grenade. Laughter broke, but also something deeper, a release. Thomas, arms still healing, whispered to Axel. The dog touched his brow. Then came the children. Tokens, drawings, a half-eaten apple. Axel accepted it all with solemn grace. As the sun dipped low, Maris sat by the riverbank. She laughed first for him, she said. Not me, not you, just him. Because she knew, Leona murmured, that her first breath of safety was because of him. Axel lay between them, eyes half closed, ears listening. Do dogs understand legacy? Maris asked. They understand presence, Leona replied. And sometimes that's more powerful. Behind them, the village lights flickered on, not just for necessity, but for hope. A hope named Axel. Spring arrived not with thunder, but with forgiveness. The frost had retreated weeks ago, leaves unfurled like promises, and for the first time in what felt like years, the morning didn't ache. On the porch of the old Weatherby cottage, Leona sat barefoot, tea in hand. Below, Soline babbled to dandelions, her curls catching sunlight in a messy amber halo. Axel lay beneath the birch, ever watchful, one ear tilted toward her. Soline plucked a leaf and toddled toward him. Da! She squealed, placing the leaf on his nose. Axel blinked once, then gently returned it to her palm. She laughed, a hiccuped, gurgling joy. Leona felt her throat tighten. It was sacred in its simplicity. Maris joined them, her cardigan still damp from the morning shower. I made coffee, she said. Leona, eyes on her daughter and the dog, whispered, Don't need it. I'm already wide awake. Later, they stood in silence as Soline curled beside Axel's flank, dandelion in hand, breath matching his. I was thinking, Maris said, when Soline turns 1, we should plant a tree. Leona nodded. Make it a sugar maple, something that turns gold every fall. Gold, like Soline, Maris whispered. Axel's tail tapped the grass once, not loud, just enough to say, I'm here. Mornings became ritual. Soline would wake with the light. She'd rise in her crib and reach always for him. And Axel would already be there, waiting, not urgent, not loud, just present. Then one morning she stood, hand clutching Axel's fur, her body wobbled upright. Axel adjusted his weight without flinching, steadying her like a post in the wind, her first real stand. Maris gasped from the kitchen. "She did it!" Leona joined her. Soline gripped Axel's neck like she belonged there. And she did. "She used a wolf to stand," Maris murmured. "Sorry," she corrected softly. "Shepherd." Axel blinked. His tail tapped once. That spring, life unfolded like a quilt across the porch. Soline, now crawling toward the daffodils, locked eyes on Axel. He took one step forward, not a command, just an invitation, and Soline followed. She took her first step, then another collapsing joyfully into his side. Axel let out a sound so soft, so reverent, it silenced everything else. Clara knelt, voice cracking with laughter. She walked. She really walked. Leona couldn't answer. She was crying too hard. Soline burrowed into Axel's fur, her laughter muffled by warmth. "She was supposed to be gone," Leona whispered. "We buried a dress, called it peace, but it wasn't. Not until now." Clara reached for her phone, then stopped. "This one's just for us." That evening, Clara would write in her journal. He once pulled her from the river to save her life. Now, he's teaching her how to live it. Axel, the dog who had once been a ghost in their grief, was now her lighthouse, her anchor, her friend. He waited, not in front, not behind, but beside her, every time. And when she stepped forward again into sunlight, into tomorrow, he moved with her. One breath, one paw print, one wobbling miracle at a time. Eldon Creek did not change all at once. It shifted like thawed earth in spring soft beneath the surface, slow to give, but ready. The village square, once cracked and uneven, now echoed with new sounds. Hammers against beams, children's laughter darting between wheelbarrows, and the low hum of purpose reborn. Where the old general store had stood shuttered since the flood, now rose the wooden frame of the new community center. Wide windows, accessible ramps, warm stone. It was not just a building, it was a promise. Leona stood beneath the scaffolding, clipboard in hand, boots coated in dust. She looked older these days, but in a way that made people listen more closely, not less. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight braid streaked with sawdust. Beside her, Axel sat quietly, eyes following every movement of the crew. He wore a simple harness now, not a badge, not a title, but a patch stitched with two words: Hope Guide. The children called him Mayor Dog. He didn't seem to mind. Across the lawn, Tomas was adjusting a wooden sign freshly painted, Eldon Creek Community Center, home of the Hollow Canine Therapy Initiative. Beneath it, in smaller script, in honor of Axel who saw what we could not, and stayed. Leona watched Tomas for a moment, then turned to the half-circle of folding chairs arranged under the oak. This afternoon was the soft launch of the therapy program. There were no cameras, just people. 15 of them, to be exact, some young, some old, most with wounds not visible to the eye. Veterans, flood survivors, children with nighttime tremors, a boy who hadn't spoken since his sister drowned, a girl who wouldn't enter her backyard because of the sound of running water. And in front of them stood Leona. Not as a mayor, not as a grandmother, as someone who had been broken once and rebuilt. "I used to think healing had a finish line," she said gently, "that once you passed it, you could fold the pain away like laundry." A soft laugh stirred the group. "But I've learned it's more like a tide. It comes, it recedes, and when it's quiet, when it's still, you plant things. She looked down at Axel, who met her gaze with a blink slow as dusk. "This dog changed our story," she said. "Not by barking, not by saving, but by staying." The first part of the program was simple. Time. Time with animals who didn't ask questions, who didn't mind silence, who let you cry without flinching or needing to understand why. The local shelter had already matched 3 rescue dogs with trainee handlers, a golden retriever with a soft belly and nervous eyes, a black mutt missing a leg but not his joy, and a shepherd lab mix named Finley, who had bonded with a child in the group within seconds. But Axel, he was different. He didn't belong to anyone now, not really. He was the anchor, the beginning, the why. Clara approached from the side, Soline toddling ahead, curls bouncing in the breeze. "Is this where the snacks are?" Clara teased, lifting a tray of lemon bars and chamomile tea. Leona smiled. Soline ran straight to Axel and threw herself into his flank. He didn't move, just gave her a lick on the ear and settled deeper into the grass. It was his usual spot, beneath the oak, where he had once stood guard while secrets were told and truths cracked open. Now it was where healing began. After the group broke into smaller circles, Leona walked the perimeter. She stopped when she reached the edge of the creek, the place where they'd once found Soline, blue-lipped and breathless. A plaque rested there now. Not grand. Just a stone with Axel's paw print cast in bronze, and a date. No words. None needed. She knelt beside it, her hand brushing the cool surface. "I hope you know," she whispered. "You saved more than her." Behind her she heard the crunch of boots Tomas. He knelt too, placing a single daffodil on the stone. "She walked again this morning," he said softly. "Straight to the barn. Wanted to see the chicks." Leona smiled. "Tenacious." "Like someone I know." They stood in silence for a while, watching the creek flow not fast, not dangerous, just enough to carry a leaf. By sundown, the folding chairs had been packed, the dogs curled in laps and corners, and the tea kettle emptied. But something lingered in the air, not just relief, readiness, the kind that comes after a long storm when you dare to plant something again. Leona looked out over the center's framework, the villagers lingering in small groups, Axel now asleep with Soline curled beside him like a comma to his sentence. Tomorrow, they'd sand floors. Next week, paint walls. But today, the village began again, not with blueprints, with belief. The envelope bore a government seal. Tomas found it wedged in the hinge of the postbox, smudged slightly by the spring drizzle. He held it for a moment, letting the cool weight of it settle in his hand like an echo from another life. Inside, an offer. A formal invitation to return to active duty with the forest rangers. Better pay. Full benefits. A unit he knew well. A landscape he once called his own. He read it twice beneath the porch light, rain tapping gently on the roof above him. Then he folded it neatly and placed it under his coffee mug. Later that morning, he walked down to the creek. Axel padded beside him, slow and steady. The banks were dappled with wildflowers again, lupine, buttercup, Queen Anne's lace, as if the land itself was remembering how to bloom. Tomas crouched near a cluster of river stones and ran his hand through the cool current. His reflection trembled, then steadied. His life had once been motion. Trail maps, signal flares, search reports. But here, He had found a rhythm that didn't demand forgetting. He looked at Axel. "You think I'd be any good in a city again?" Axel gave a short huff, then lay down with his head between his paws. His eyes flicked toward the ridge where Solene sometimes played now, legs still unsteady but full of will. Thomas smiled. "Yeah, I thought so." At the same time, Leona sat at her desk with a pen poised over blank paper. The stationery was plain, no header, no seal, just cream and linen smooth, folded once down the middle. The hardest part was knowing how to begin. She hadn't written a letter like this in years, not since her husband died, not since her daughter left Eldon Creek. But some things deserve to be said the old way, with ink and hand, and the kind of silence only a page can hold. She glanced at Axel, who lay near the door, watching over the home as he always did, without demand, without interruption, just presence. And then she began. To Sergeant Mason C. Avery, C.O., U.S. Army, K-9 Veterans Division, Fort Belmore, Wyoming. Dear Sergeant Avery, you don't know me, but I know your dog. His name here is Axel. You probably knew him under another RA-213 maybe, or something equally impersonal. I don't know what he went through in your service. I won't pretend to understand, but I want you to know what he became after. He came to us by accident, a storm, a frightened child, and a creek that swallowed nearly everything except his instinct. He saved a baby girl, stayed by her side until she was found, tracked through woods no man could walk, sat through meetings where truth finally surfaced, carried the weight of a town's silence and then helped lift it. Axel is more than a hero here. He's our hinge between what was broken and what now begins again. He's older. There's gray in his coat. His left hind leg stiffens in the cold. But his eyes, they hold something I don't have a name for, only a feeling, that survival doesn't end with being rescued. It continues when we choose to heal. I thought you should know that your dog didn't disappear. He didn't fall away. He found us. And in doing so, he gave us back our breath. With gratitude beyond words, Leona Fairweather, Mayor Eldon Creek. She sealed the envelope with trembling hands. Outside, Solene's laughter echoed through the yard. She was playing near the daffodils again, her small boots making tracks through the soft dirt. Leona watched from the window. Axel had moved, now standing just behind the toddler, watchful, not guarding exactly, just being. That evening, Thomas dropped by with a bundle of firewood and a grin too big for his face. "I turned it down," he said. Leona didn't ask what. She already knew. "I belong here now," he added, stacking the logs with care. "Funny how that creeps up on you." She nodded, then handed him the letter. "Can you take this to the post office in the morning?" He looked at the name on the envelope, read it slowly. "Sergeant Avery?" She gave a small smile. "He deserves to know what Axel's become." Tomas stared at the writing for a moment, then tucked the envelope into his coat. "I'll make sure it gets there." As night settled, and the hearth warmed the walls, Leona stepped out onto the porch with a cup of tea and a wool blanket draped over her shoulders. Axel lay at the top step, gaze fixed on the sky as if counting stars. She sat beside him. "Do you remember him?" she asked softly. "Your old handler?" Axel didn't move, just the flick of his ear. Then he nudged her knee with his nose, once, firmly, before settling again. "I think you do," she whispered. And somehow, that was enough. The sun was beginning to fall, casting gold over the rooftops of Eldon Creek. The breeze smelled of honeysuckle and old pine, that familiar whisper of spring turning to summer. Long shadows stretched across the village square, touching the porch of the Fairweather home like fingers reaching gently for home. Leona sat in her wicker chair, the one with the faded cushion that had survived 3 winters. Her hands rested loosely around a ceramic mug that had long gone cold. She wasn't drinking anymore, just holding, as if the warmth had sunk into the clay and stayed there, like memory. Maris sat cross-legged on the porch boards, her back against the post, hair loose and curling at the edges. She hadn't worn braids in weeks. She didn't need them now, not as armor, not as silence. Her voice had found its place, and so had she. Between them, Soline giggled, balancing unsteadily on padded feet, her curls bouncing with each wobble. She babbled to herself, to the sky, to the dog that watched her with the eyes of an old sentinel. Axel. He lay stretched across the porch, chin resting on his paws, breath steady, chest rising and falling like the tide. His ears twitched when Soline's squeal rose too high, but he didn't move. His eyes stayed half-lidded, fixed on the tree line beyond the creek, beyond the place where the past used to press like a bruise. Soline toddled toward him, one hand outstretched, the other clutching a wooden block. She dropped the block on the porch and plopped herself beside him with the gravity of small children who trust the earth will always catch them. Then, slowly, deliberately, she placed her tiny palm on his chest. Axel didn't stir. He simply blinked once, then exhaled, his ribs shifting under her fingers. The weight of her hand was nothing to him. But the gesture, it was everything. Leona felt something tighten in her throat. Not sorrow, not even joy. Just the sharp, quiet ache of knowing you're witnessing a moment that will never happen exactly the same way again. She does that every night now, Maris said softly. Right before the sun goes down. Leona nodded. She knows, she murmured. Knows what? That he's still watching. In the distance, the bell atop the old chapel chimed once, no longer a call to alarm or gathering, but simply a marking of time. In this village, where time had once stood still, it now moved gently forward. Axel shifted his head and nudged Soline's foot with his nose. She laughed, a clear, bell-like sound, and reached to grab one of his ears. He let her. Of course he did. Maris tilted her head back, watching the clouds drift behind the rooftops. I used to think silence was something you had to fight, she said. Something you had to fill or run from. Leona turned toward her. And now? Maris smiled faintly. Now I think sometimes it's a kind of peace. When it's shared. They sat like that for a while. No one moved. Even Soline grew quiet, curling against Axel's side, her thumb in her mouth, her breath sinking to the rise and fall of the dog beside her. The porch creaked gently beneath them. The world felt held. The plaque by the riverbank, installed just days before, caught the last light of sunset. From the porch, it was only a glint, but everyone in the village knew what it said. Axel, guardian of the creek, for the lives he saved and the ones he helped rebuild. Down the hill, lanterns were beginning to flicker to life on front porches. Tomas could be seen stacking wood near the new community center. Clara's laughter echoed faintly from her back garden. The village breathed as one, no longer divided by secrets, no longer hollowed by fear. It hadn't gone back to the way it was. It had become something better. Leona leaned down and ran her hand gently over Axel's back. You've done enough, she whispered. You really have. Axel didn't lift his head, but his tail gave one soft thump against the floorboards. Maris reached over and took Leona's hand. Soline had fallen asleep against the dog, her breath warm against his fur. They sat that way until the sky turned indigo, until the first stars came out and the breeze carried the scent of moss and pine and something older, something rooted. Guardianship had never just been about protection. It had always been about presence. And in the stillness, in the hush that followed pain, Axel remained, not as a ghost of what was, but as a keeper of what now is. In the quiet heart of Eldon Creek, a German shepherd named Axel reminded an entire village what it means to stand watch not with words, but with loyalty, courage, and unwavering love. Through storms of fear, fractured truths, and buried sorrow, he became more than just a dog. He became a guardian of second chances. This story is a tribute not just to Axel, but to all animals who offer us more than we can ever repay: comfort without conditions, protection without pride, and companionship that outlasts even the deepest pain. In every paw print lies a promise that healing is possible, even after the darkest nights. German shepherds like Axel are not just working dogs. They are family. They are heroes in fur. And sometimes they are the bridge between what was broken and what can be whole again. Let this tale be a reminder to listen more deeply, to protect the voiceless, and to honor the quiet strength in every creature who chooses to stand by our side. Because sometimes it's not the loudest presence that changes the world. Sometimes it's the quiet one lying at your feet, watching, waiting, loving, always.